So good evening, sisters and brothers. My name is John Weissman, and I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Warren J. Plow Charitable Trust, our main sponsor this year, and of course the cast and crew of Voices. Voices is a gift to the community. Everyone here is giving their time and energy and performance. You want to come and take your seat?
Oh,
yep.
Okay, thank you.
I'm especially thankful for this crew, for this cast. And also, let me tell you, it's most of you who have been here in the past, it's a new space for us. It's fantastic. We couldn't have pulled this thing off without Scott McPherson and the executive director. So tonight we tell the story of the first May Day. Several 100,000 workers walked into U.S. history and started May Day as a worldwide phenomenon. It is International Workers' Day around the world. We also give voice to the meaning May Day has for us today. A time of struggle. Some of us haven't seen such tension and stress before on all fronts, and especially in the war zones. We also acknowledge that Western Massachusetts and beyond is the ancestral land of the Nonotuck people, the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag, the Mohegan and the Pequot, the Mohican and the Abenaki. They continue to be connected to this land. Now, as I want you to be sure your cell phones are turned off, check that. You know where the exits are. What we offer is a montage of voices of working people's history with emphasis on Western Mass voices. So that means a couple things. Please rise when we sing the Internationale and when we sing Solidarity Forever. Please treat the performance as a whole, so save your applause for the end, but do join in on the singing. So, please rise for the cast of Voices of Working People's History and the Internationale.
Arise, ye prisoners of starvation. Arise, ye wretched of the earth. For justice thunders condemnation. A better world in birth. No more traditions change shall bind us. The rising slaves no more enthralled. The earth shall rise a new foundation. We have been not, we shall be all. Oh, 'tis the final conflict. Let each stand in their place. The international working class shall be the human race. Oh, 'tis the final conflict. Let each stand in their place. The international working class shall be the human race.
The Civil War gave birth to modern mechanized warfare. It also gave birth to the ferocity of modern industrialized class warfare.
At stake in the titanic struggle between the agrarian South and the industrial North was the role of the nation-state in protecting capital and defending a new political economy. An economy based on wage labor, no longer on enslaved labor, producers who would also become consumers, and a new working class, surrounded by a desperate, impoverished mass and divided by appeals to racism and nationalism.
The sociologist, activist, and socialist W.E.B. Du Bois, born and raised in Great Barrington, wrote,
God wept, but that mattered little to an unbelieving age. What mattered most was the world wept, and is still weeping, and blind with tears and blood. For there began to arise in America in 1876 a new capitalism and a new enslavement of labor. The immense profit from this exploitation and worldwide commerce enabled a guild of millionaires to engage the greatest engineers, the wisest men of science, as well as pay high wages to more intelligent labor, and at that same time to have left enough surplus to make more thorough the dictatorship of capital over the state and over the popular vote, not only in Europe, but in America and in Asia.
The working class quickly responded to this new order by seeking its overthrow. The first significant labor federation in the U.S. was the Knights of Labor, formed in 1869 and reaching its peak in the late 19th century. The Knights organized workers on an equal basis, including African Americans, women, and unskilled laborers. Black people eventually formed the majority of Knights membership in the South. They championed broad-ranging social and economic reform, including an 8-hour workday, health and safety laws, injury compensation.
An end to child and convict labor, equal pay for women, and arbitration to resolve differences between workers and employers. They called for nationalization of the railroads and telephone networks and a graduated federal income tax.
The Knights also envisioned a cooperative commonwealth of worker-owned and run enterprises. They operated a chain of 200 industrial cooperatives that included workshops and foundries, mines and mills, even potters and lumberjacks.
Membership in the Knights was open to
all working class people over the age of 16, except bankers, lawyers, and gamblers.
They rewrote the gospel song, Hold the Fort, and started singing.
Toiling millions now are waking, see them marching on. All the tyrants now are shaking, here their power is gone. Storm the fort, ye Knights of Labor, battle for your cause. Equal rights for every neighbor, down to tyrant laws.
The new capitalism and new enslavement of labor that Du Bois wrote about virtually continued the old enslavement of the South. Long after the Emancipation and Reconstruction, most African Americans in the South were not free to move from job to job or set up businesses and were unable to build household wealth.
Sharecropping amounted to indentured servitude and perpetuated aspects of slavery. Jim Crow laws and violence restricted movement and voting, and a system of convict labor developed that wasn't outlawed by Congress until 1951. African Americans were arrested for petty and phony offenses or violating Jim Crow laws. When they were unable to pay the fines and court fees, sheriffs, judges, and wardens sold them to the growing plantations, mines, mills, railroad companies, timber camps, and factories.
Northern industrialists invested in the South and thrived on this system. Mines operated by U.S. Steel used tens of thousands of imprisoned African Americans. In the new economic order, this slavery by another name was one of the most powerful weapons against unions and higher wages.
In 1882, hundreds of skilled and unskilled white and free black workers struck the Pratt mines in Birmingham, Alabama. The company then filled the mines with convicts and crushed the strike. The coal and steel industry learned then that it could only thrive with forced labor. Everywhere in the U.S., federal, state, and local governments collaborated with private employers to ensure that African Americans were paid less, segregated, and treated worse than whites.
There is mean things happening in this land. There is mean things happening in this land. Oh, the rich man boasts and brags, while the poor man goes in rags. There is mean things happening in this land.
In the decades after the Civil War, the United States also completed its violent conquest of the continent. Native American resistance was legendary, but in the words of historian Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz,
The soldiers kept hunting them down, incarcerating them, massacring civilians, removing them and stealing their children to haul off to faraway boarding schools.
their stolen land provided the foundation of the U.S. economy. Apologists for this genocide noted that Native Americans were
Too socialistic, not selfish enough, and they hold the land in common.
In the 1870s, a severe worldwide depression provided the backdrop for the first national strike in U.S. history. Private businesses overextended production in their greed to increase already swollen profits.
With the crash came runs on the banks and demonstrations by unemployed people. By 1877, less than 1/5 of the workforce was working regularly and full-time. Many people migrated far and wide for what work did exist. Those who were working had their wages slashed.
Another 10% pay cut sparked the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. A small spontaneous strike in Baltimore quickly spread across the country. It drew militant support from farmers, miners, steel workers, and others.
Women were particularly valiant, hurling stones as they stood against the fire of army troops. After 2.5 weeks, the strike was smashed by the armed might of the U.S. government, which brought in additional soldiers from the campaigns to take Native American lands.
No effective national labor union existed, but the need was clear.
There is mean things happening in this land. There is mean things happening in this land. Poor folks living on the street, got no job, no food to eat. There is mean things happening in this land.
On November 15, 1881, a number of labor unions and chapters of the Knights of Labor formed the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions. 5 years later, it became the American Federation of Labor, which, since 1955, is the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, the AFL-CIO. A driving force behind the new federation was the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners, formed just a few months earlier. And the driving force behind the Carpenters Union was Peter McGuire. McGuire convinced skeptical, local-minded union activists around the country that a national labor federation was not only necessary, but also possible.
My parents emigrated from Ireland. I was born in New York City in 1852. The neighborhood where I grew up was a living grave. I quit school at 11 to work when Da went off to the Union Army. But I paid attention. I met Samuel Gompers and other young firebrands at free night classes at Cooper Union. I was convinced of the futility of reformist measures. In the late 1870s, when I was organising for the Socialist Party here in New England, I walked from city to city. And when my feet gave out, I hooked freights. New England, the West, the Southwest, the Midwest. Wherever I went, I urged workers to organise themselves, abolish the wage system, and institute a universal system of cooperative production and distribution.
In 1868, Congress had passed a law mandating an 8-hour workday, but it was largely ignored, and President Chester Arthur refused to enforce it. McGuire concluded that there was only one way for workers to get an effective 8-hour law.
An enactment by the working men themselves, that on a given day, 8 hours shall constitute a day's work, and they ought to enforce it themselves.
Peter McGuire is often called the father of May Day. In 1884, the carpenters' delegation to the Federation Convention introduced a resolution that
8 hours shall constitute a legal day's labor from and after May 1st, 1886.
and the working class took up the cause as a freedom movement.
We mean to make things over. We are tired of toil for naught, with but bare enough to live upon and ne'er an hour for thought. We want to feel the sunshine, and we want to smell the flowers. We're sure that God has willed it, and we mean to have 8 hours. We're summoning our farces from shipyard, shop, and mill. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will.
The United National Campaign to win a shorter workday inspired local activists throughout the country. Workers rushed into unions and joined strikes. Union membership almost tripled in 1886. African American sugar workers in Louisiana, migrant timber workers in the Pacific Northwest, and women office clerks in the urban Northeast formed new unions.
During the 1880s, 5 million people migrated to the U.S. Many settled in Chicago, a city of industrial smog and crowded tenements. Sewage was pumped into Lake Michigan, and drinking water was pumped out. Hospitals were hellholes.
Irish, Scandinavian, Czech, English, and German immigrants dominated the Chicago workforce. They formed a strong and growing labor movement, led by a group of anarchists and socialists agitating through newspapers in different languages. Anarchists believed that government should not stand above the people, that workers organizing themselves could run society. Socialists wanted capitalism replaced by a system with collective ownership.
Although it may be hard to believe today, it was tens of thousands of revolutionaries who forged the U.S. trade union movement. They realized that peaceful change faced violent resistance. Strikes and peaceful demonstrations were routinely disrupted by heavily armed police who beat and sometimes killed unarmed people. Newspapers called for brutal repression. Businessmen used private armies to break up labor actions.
Workers, can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab, or will you take a stand? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
On May 1st, 1886, 500,000 workers across the country laid down their tools, vowing not to pick them up until they had won the 8-hour workday. The nationwide coordination of strikes, rallies, and parades was unheard of anywhere in the world. Many employers conceded defeat and agreed to the 8-hour day.
Nowhere were workers better organized than in Chicago, where 80,000 workers struck, nearly closing the city.
Then on May 3rd, at the McCormick Harvester Works in Chicago, where 300 scabs were being brought in past locked out lumber workers, the police attacked the picket line. According to a witness,
The police fired into their backs. Boys and men were killed as they ran.
Police killed 6 strikers. In response, the anarchists called for a protest the next day in Haymarket Square. One of the speakers was Albert Parsons, a radical activist, Central Labor Union leader, and editor of the newspaper, The Alarm.
just as protesters were heading home, the police moved in. A bomb exploded in their ranks. 7 policemen died. Coming in the midst of the largest national strike ever, the bombing created mass hysteria, the nation's first of several Red Scares.
The ruling class hoping this could discredit the labor movement, quickly indicted Albert Parsons and 7 other activists. Most were arrested, but Parsons was not to be found. Then, on the first day of the trial, he suddenly appeared.
I have come to stand trial, Your Honor, with my innocent comrades.
Albert Parsons, born in Texas, descended from pilgrims, ran away from home to fight for the Confederacy, but after the war, he threw his lot in with the freedmen, championed their right to vote and participate in politics.
Passion and politics brought Parsons together with Lucy Gonzalez, a radical of African American, Mexican, and indigenous heritage. Hounded by racists, the couple left Texas in 1873 for Chicago, where Albert's leadership skills and gift for oratory brought him to the forefront of the labor movement and to the attention of the Chicago authorities.
On the morning of his hanging, Parsons wrote to his friend Dyer Lum,
The guard has just awakened me. I have washed my face and drank a cup of coffee. The doctor asked me if I wanted stimulants. I said no. The dear boys Engel, Fisher, and Spee saluted me with firm voices. Well, my dear comrade, the hour grows near. Caesar, the government that is, kept me awake last night with the noise, the music, the hammer and the saw, erecting his throne, my scaffold.
Dyer Lum was a Civil War veteran and member of the Knights of Labor. He settled in Northampton in 1873 and is buried there in the Bridge Street Cemetery. In 1877, he ran unsuccessfully for Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts on both the Greenback and the Labor Reform Party tickets. After the Haymarket incident, he befriended the defendants and may have plotted to rescue them from jail. Lum wrote a defense of the Haymarket martyrs before their execution, demonstrating that they were convicted for their beliefs, not for any actual conspiracy.
A bomb! A dynamite bomb! Such was the startling intelligence which went over the wires from the city of Chicago on the night of May 4th, 1886. Who threw it? After a long and protracted trial, the question remains unanswered. Yet, 8 men were placed on trial for their lives, denounced and virtually tried and condemned by the press, whose existence as caterers to capitalists lay in creating a scarecrow and imparting to it some semblance of reality. Capital and labor were pitted against each other in a new, irrepressible conflict. A reign of terror set in. Property trembled for its existence before a phantom. Fear paralyzed reason, and force, arbitrary and illegal, held full sway.
One of the Haymarket defendants was August Spies, a German immigrant. At his trial, he said,
I am a socialist. Now, strike me. But hear me before you strike. What do I stand for? Briefly stated, it is the right of the toiler to have the free and equal use of the tools of production, and the right of the producers to their product. This is my crime. If you think that by hanging us you stamp out the labor movement from which the downtrodden millions, the millions who toil in want and misery, expect salvation, if this is your opinion, then hang us. Here you will tread upon a spark, but here and there, behind you and in front of you, and everywhere flames blaze up. It is a subterranean fire. You cannot put it out.
On November 11, 1887, August Spies, Albert Parsons, Adolf Fischer, and George Engel were hanged.
In 1888, the Young American Federation of Labor voted to continue the 8-hour movement and set May 1st as the time for action. In 1890, the International Socialist Congress, meeting in Paris, made it a worldwide movement, setting May 1st, 1890, as an international day of struggle, in solidarity with their United States comrades. It's been a world holiday ever since.
Oh, 'tis the final conflict
Reporter's Notebook, Holyoke Transcript, May 1891. I asked a young girl who attends the Chestnut School why she was not running and jumping with her mates. She blushed at this pointed question.
My papa is out of work now, and Mama says we must be very careful not to wear out our shoes. So we keep still.
A whole sermon on economy and self-sacrifice is contained in that brief answer, and a splendid argument for socialism.
Many reacted to the poverty and violence of capitalism in the 19th century by envisioning a better world. One of the visionaries was Edward Bellamy, a newspaperman from Chicopee Falls, who wrote for the Springfield Union in the 1870s and in 1880 co-founded, with his brother Charles, the Springfield Daily News, a working-class focused penny paper. Bellamy's novel, Looking Backward, published in 1887, imagined a man waking up in the year 2000 in a socialist U.S. based on equality and justice, and looking back on the world as it was in the late 19th century. Looking Backward was second only to Karl Marx's Das Kapital as the most influential book of the age. Bellamy clubs were formed around the world. Here's one of their songs.
My country, 'tis of thee, lost land of liberty, of thee we sing. Land which the millionaires who govern our affairs own for themselves and heirs. Hail to thy king. Land where the wealthy few can make the many do their royal will, and tax for selfish greed the toilers till they bleed, and those not yet weak need crush down and kill.
Union organizer Tom Mooney was raised in Holyoke. His father, an Indian coal miner, was one of the first organizers of the Knights of Labor. He died at 36 from tuberculosis when Tom was 10. Tom's mother became a rock sorter in a Holyoke paper mill. Tom helped her in the mill.
I suppose the urge to serve the labor movement was born in me.
From prison in 1934, Mooney recalled an experience in a Holyoke factory.
I served my apprenticeship as a core maker in the Dean Steam Pump Company, where the Iron Molders Union had a closed shop. The core makers had an open shop, working for anything they could get. The Molders Union and the Core Makers Union acted separately, and in strikes, each union had to work with scabs of the opposite craft. When I completed my apprenticeship and joined the core makers, I was receiving $1 a day for 10 hours work. I immediately asked for the standard scale of $2.25. The boss said to me,
If you will increase the amount of work you are doing at present, I will raise you to $1.80 a day.
but I was turning out the same amount and brand of work that those making $2.25 were turning out. I said nothing and went back to my bench, determined not to increase my output.
Don't scab for the bosses, don't listen to their lies. Us poor folks haven't got a chance unless we organize. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
American Federation of Labor President Sam Gompers opposed political affiliation and radicalism in the AFL. This, combined with the AFL catering to white skilled labor over unskilled, led to the formation of the Industrial Workers of the World, the Wobblies. Their motto was,
An injury to one is an injury to all!
in Chicago, in June 1905, 200 socialists, anarchists, and radical trade unionists from all over the United States founded the IWW as an international union. It was the only U.S. union to welcome all workers, including women, immigrants, African Americans, and Asians, in all industries, into the same organization. Its first leaders included Mary Harris Jones, commonly known as Mother Jones, railroad union leader Eugene Debs, mine worker leader Big Bill Haywood, and Lucy Parsons, the widow of Haymarket martyr Albert Parsons. The IWW Constitution begins,
"The working class and the employing class have nothing in common.
There can be no peace as long as hunger and want are found among the millions of working people.
And the few who make up the employing class have all the good things in life."
Between these two classes, a struggle must go on until the workers of the world organize as a class.
Take possession of the means of production.
Abolish the wage system.
And live in harmony with the earth.
Come all you good workers, good news to you I'll tell, of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Lucy Parsons was not content to simply mourn the loss of her husband. She vowed to continue to fight injustice, even though her husband had been killed, and she feared the same fate for herself. From a perspective of class consciousness, Lucy challenged others to see issues of sex and race as intertwined with the larger class struggle.
We women are the slaves of slaves. We are exploited more ruthlessly than men. Whenever wages are to be reduced, the capitalist class uses women to reduce them. And if there's anything you men could do in the future, it is to organize women.
She also advocated radical new tactics to win strikes, like the sit-in, which became so potent during the Great Depression.
My conception of the strike of the future is not to strike and go out and starve, but to strike and remain in and take possession of the necessary property of production.
Like her late husband, Lucy Parsons was a revolutionary socialist.
Now, what do we mean when we say revolutionary socialist? We mean that the land shall belong to the landless, the tools to the toiler, and the products to the producers. I believe that if every man and every woman who toils in the mines, the mills, the workshops, the fields, the factories, and the farms of our broad America should decide in their minds that they have which of right belongs to them, and that no idler shall live upon their toil, then there is no army that is large enough to overcome you, for you yourselves constitute the army.
Elizabeth Gurley Flynn was only 14 when the Wobblies convened in 1905, but within 2 years she had become a high-energy organizer and speaker for them.
Wednesday, January 31st, 1906, is a date engraved on my memory. The occasion of my first public speech on the topic of what socialism will do for women. I was not yet 16. I labored to write my speech and stubbornly resisted all attempts of my father and others to tell me what to say or to actually write it for me. Good or bad, I felt it had to be my own. I began to quake inwardly at the start, facing an adult audience for the first time. But they were sympathetic, and I was soon sailing along serenely. When I concluded, I asked for questions, as I heard other speakers do. None were forthcoming. The audience apparently sensed that I was nervous. How they laughed when I said resentfully, "Just because I'm young and a girl is no reason you shouldn't ask me questions."
Elizabeth Gurley Flynn was arrested at least 10 times in her lifetime. The denial of the Bill of Rights was always involved, usually in wobbly free speech fights.
In August 1906, I was arrested with my father and several others for speaking without a permit and blocking traffic at 38th Street and Broadway, the heart of the theatrical district. When the police officer ordered us to stop, We refused, and reserves were called. The charges were dropped, with the judge advising me to go back to school that fall and be a student a while longer before I become a teacher. The New York Times editorialized in a humorous, patronizing style.
The ferocious socialist haranguer, Miss Flynn, who will graduate at school in 2 years, tells us what to think, which is just what she thinks.
When the city of Spokane, Washington outlawed street meetings, Flynn and others were arrested for breaking this law. The response was simple but effective. Wobblies descended on the town and forced the authorities to arrest over 500 of them until it became too expensive, and they were released.
All charges dropped. The Bill of Rights defended.
There once was a union maid who never was afraid of the goons and the gangs and the company banks and the deputy sheriffs who made the raid. She went to the union hall when a meeting it was called, and when the company boys came round, she always stood her ground. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die. Oh, you can't scare me. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die.
Emma Goldman, orator, agitator, organizer, had been radicalized by the trial and hanging of the Haymarket martyrs. She was jailed many times for inflammatory speeches and daring lectures, given in English and her native Yiddish, on topics ranging from anarchism and syndicalism to free love and gay rights. In the early 1890s, she also lived communally and ran an ice cream parlor in Worcester.
Accidentals. I was one of the most untiring and gayest. One evening a young boy took me aside. With grave face as if he were about to announce the death of a dear friend, he whispered to me,
Comrade, it does not behoove an agitator to dance. Certainly not with such reckless abandon anyway. It's undignified for one who is on the way to becoming a force in the anarchist movement. Your frivolity will only hurt the cause.
I told him to mind your own business. I was tired of having the cause constantly thrown in my face. I do not believe that a cause which stands for a beautiful ideal, for anarchism, for release and freedom from conventions and prejudice, should demand the denial of life and joy. Our cause should not expect me to become a nun, and the movement should not be turned into a cloister. If that's what it means, I don't want it.
Labor leader Eugene Debs, one of the IWW founders, was greatly influenced by Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward. He ran 5 times as a socialist candidate for president. In 1908, he campaigned from a train called the Red Special, decorated with red flags, bunting, and streamers, with a baggage car stuffed with socialist literature, and a brass band. He visited over 300 communities in 33 states, including Holyoke, accompanied by Tom Mooney.
Capitalism is a thing, a system. It's an organization of society under which we all live, and it's wrong. It forces the individual to be selfish and rewards him for beating and abusing his fellow man. Profit is the aim of all human effort, not use, not service. The competitive system sets man against man, class against class. It puts a premium on hate. And love is abnormal and all but impossible. We do not preach hate. We preach love. We do not teach class. We're opposed to class. That is capitalism again. We teach the worker not to strive to rise out of his class, not to want to be an employer, but to stay and help with his fellow workers. And by striving together, industrially, financially, politically, learn to cooperate for the common good, then we should have no class at all, should we? Only men, women, and children.
As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me a golden valley. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
What W.E.B. Du Bois described as the thorough dictatorship of capital around the world was keenly felt in Puerto Rico. After the U.S. occupation of the island in 1898, the economy was transformed into capitalist agriculture. The anarchist socialist Luisa Capetillo echoed Du Bois.
Wage slavery is the slavery of today. The oppressor that has made and will make more hungry people and criminals than the slavery of race and feudalism. The institution of slavery no longer exists, but as long as there are masters, there will be slaves.
Luisa Capetillo is a legend of the working class history. Besides being the first Puerto Rican woman to wear trousers and to defend free love, she was a journalist and a labor organizer.
When there is no longer the need to steal a roll of bread for lack of food, when private property no longer exists, and we all begin to view each other as brothers and sisters, then, and only then, will the prisons and the useless destructive churches disappear. Misery, hate, and prostitution will cease to exist. Free trade will exist because all frontiers and borders will be abolished. And then true liberty will reign on this planet. I find no idea to be utopian. The essential thing is to put each idea in practice. To begin,
Capetillo organized several strikes in Puerto Rico, including the massive sugarcane strike of over 40,000 workers in 1916, during the most intense period of strike activity in Puerto Rico's history. She also organized and supported Cuban and Puerto Rican tobacco workers in New York City, Tampa, and Cuba.
I saw a child with one hand holding up her poor little skirt as a pocket for seed, scattering it with the other hand in open furrows. She was a beautiful symbol of toil and perseverance, and I salute her in the name of universal brotherhood. But you, exploiting monster, beware, lest you fall into the precipice of your vanities, the abyss of your errors. Tremble! Shiver with dread at the terrible end awaiting you for your indifference toward your brothers, the human sacrifices whom you plunge into the deepest degradations of poverty.
In the early 20th century, the western Massachusetts mill town of Ludlow was a so-called model manufacturing community where the employer engaged in welfare work like schooling and recreation, building the high school, library, hospital, and of course, housing. But even the model employer is still an employer. In 1909, the mill workers in Ludlow went out on a strike.
36 bobbin boys refused to accept a cut of 50 cents a week from their pittance of $5. They retaliated by submitting a request for 50 cents more. Their employers refused, and they immediately struck work.
Their work was then handed over to the weavers. These workers, being on the piece system, then found it impossible to make a living, and 200 weavers followed the example of the boys and quit their looms.
The Ludlow Manufacturing Associates began importing strikebreakers. This raised the ire of the remainder of the employees, and we went out in sympathy. French Canadians, Scot, and Polish were now involved. So the management changed taxes, tactics and sent away the strikebreakers.
Instead, they started evictions, rendering some 300 of us homeless. Our stove was removed from the house while we were still cooking.
The streets rapidly took on the appearance of a camp. People improvised tents from bed clothing and erected their cooking stoves underneath.
A walk down the streets where we were herded together revealed 30 mothers with infants clasped to their breasts, many of the women barefoot, and half of them insufficiently clad, hardly proof against the sharp air of a November morning.
These tactics in no way helped the mill owners, and sympathy rapidly accumulated for the strikers. Even the mayor of Springfield and the lieutenant governor got involved. So did the Springfield Central Labor Union, which had formed in 1887. The CLU built a labor community religious coalition that fed the strikers and helped settle the strike. This gave birth to Textile Workers Local 720 at the Ludlow Mills.
As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing bread and roses, bread and roses.
Lawrence, Massachusetts, 1912. What a story.
The great textile strike by immigrants, fighting such horrid living conditions that the mortality rate for children was 50% by age 6. And 36 out of every 100 men and women who worked in the mill died by the age of 25.
The creative leadership of the IWW united 20,000 native-born workers of English, Irish, and German descent, and French-Canadian, Italian, Slavic, Hungarian, Portuguese, and Syrian immigrants.
The nationwide fundraising,
The efficient system of translation, relief committees, soup kitchens, food distribution, medical care by volunteer doctors.
The dramatic trip by hundreds of children to homes in New York City for the duration of the strike.
Police and militia detaining the children and arresting their parents when city authorities tried to prevent another 100 from going to Philadelphia.
The police clubbing children and their mothers.
The press photographing it all.
And Big Bill Hayward thundering,
There is no foreigner here except the capitalists. Do not let them divide you by sex, color, or creed, or nationality.
The rising of the women in the parades were where one banner read,
Give us bread and give us roses.
As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing their ancient cry for bread. Art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits knew. Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too.
The nations of Europe went to war in 1914. In the U.S., class conflict was intense. It included workers' strong opposition to military and economic preparedness for war.
In the summer of 1916, during a Preparedness Day parade in San Francisco, a bomb exploded, killing 9 people. Labor organizer Tom Mooney and Warren Billings, a shoe worker, were framed by business and government interests and convicted. They spent 23 years in prison before being pardoned.
It was a time of violent political repression. The President Woodrow Wilson was the son of a Virginia minister who preached that the Bible sanctified slavery.
His Postmaster General, Albert Burleson, censored large numbers of foreign language, pacifist, wobbly, and socialist newspapers and magazines. His Attorney General, A. Mitchell Palmer, led the Palmer Raids, warrantless, unlawful search and seizures targeting Italian, Eastern European, and Jewish immigrants, especially anarchists, communists, and labor activists. More than 6,000 were arrested across 36 cities, and over 556 foreign citizens were deported.
Eugene Debs, Ella Goldman, and others were imprisoned during World War I for agitating against it and against the draft. After the war, Goldman was deported.
In 1902, at age 22, Frances Perkins graduated from Mount Holyoke College, where she listed herself as
Not saved.
her class in political economy visited factories in the city of Holyoke to observe the working conditions.
I was horrified by what I saw. Little children, 5 and 6 years old, were working next to adults, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. It didn't take much to see that anyone who was born into poverty was destined to live and die into poverty unless someone or something intervened. I guess it was my youthful enthusiasm, but I felt it was sort of up to me.
She championed the rights of industrial workers the rest of her life.
I knew of people who had had their hands cut off while doing factory work. Women and girls could get scalped in a textile factory. You'd get down under the machine to pick up a bobbin that had fallen, and the wheel would catch your hair or pull you or cut your head off.
Right.
Children were particularly vulnerable. Because of their small hands, they were often required to stick their hands into the machinery to dislodge something that might be stuck.
What happened to them?
If they lived, they might get a few dollars, but most of them didn't get anything.
What did they do?
I don't know what they did. Somewhere or other, they buried themselves away in the general population. These things were commonly accepted, and it took the efforts of thousands to start a movement toward making a systematic recompense for injury and disability arising out of an accident in the course of employment.
Perkins would end her speeches about the need for child labor laws with a verse.
The golf links lie so close to the mills that nearly every day the laboring children can look out and see the men at play.
On March 25th, 1911, Perkins, a young social worker in New York, witnessed the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire.
146 garment workers, mostly Jewish and Italian immigrant women, aged 16 to 23, either died from the fire or jumped to their death. That day, it was seared into my heart and into my brain that never to be forgotten memory that I had to spend the rest of my life fighting for conditions that would never permit anything such as this tragedy.
Frances Perkins joined Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal government in 1933 as his Secretary of Labor, the first woman to hold a U.S. cabinet position. She successfully fought for the first national minimum wage, the Social Security Act, unemployment insurance, and the National Labor Relations Act.
The administration was taking over at the worst time in the nation's economic history. The Depression had left deep scars on the American population. Many people lost everything in the crash, but President Hoover wouldn't admit that there was anything wrong. Little Hoovervilles of homeless men, women, and children were springing up everywhere. Republicans and Democrats couldn't agree on anything. Hate groups were proliferating. The Supreme Court was dominated by a group of people who called themselves originalists, who always seemed to find in favor of the rich at the expense of the working class. In theory, the desire of the whole American people is for unity, for brotherhood. The trouble is that too many people are content to emotionalize about it, and that too many intelligent believers are content just to talk about it. The challenge is to be doers in the field in which we think.
Nobody living can ever stop me as I go walking in freedom. freedom high. Nobody living, nobody living. Make me turn back, can't make me turn back. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Anna Burns Sullivan started working in a textile mill in Holyoke in 1918 at the age of 14.
My mother didn't like the idea when I had to go to work, me going into a mill. But that was the only thing you could get into, and we needed the money.
She worked in the mills through the 1930s. In 1936, she organized the Skinner Mill in Holyoke for Textile Workers Union of America.
The first real organizing I ever did was with my own group at the Skinner Mill. You had to do it by personal contact at the plant. We had leaflets in Polish, French, and English. Every time I went to pass out the leaflets, the cops would come and run me right out of town. They knew it as soon as you came over the bridge in Ludlow. And in East Hampton, you had to go over the mountain. Finally, Roosevelt, the New Deal, and the CIO made the law that we had the right to pass out those leaflets. We had the right to organize. That was the Wagner Act. We'd organize a place in a matter of days, and contracts were signed within a short period after that.
Sullivan became the first manager of the Textile Workers Western Mass Joint Board. She was also active in the Democratic Party and ran unsuccessfully for Congress in 1950.
I got to know a good number of the CIO organizers and some of the friendly professors at Smith and Amherst. That helped when Margaret Sanger came to town in 1940 and tried to speak on birth control in Holyoke. The Roman Catholic Church was against Sanger and against birth control. They were up in arms against her. They wanted large families. No one would let Sanger speak anywhere in Holyoke. That was when I led her to our union hall. Birth control was an important issue for our members, but this was also a free speech issue. The church wasn't too happy with me, but a lot of Catholic women later told me they were glad we did what we did.
Early in the Great Depression, the town of Ware, Massachusetts was still a booming producer of textiles, clothing, and shoes, but disaster loomed large. In October of 1937, the Otis Company, the town's largest employer, suddenly announced it was liquidating and selling its assets and equipment to 3 Southern cotton men. Once the sale was completed, only empty buildings would remain.
It was an overwhelming surprise. Vast number of us had our jobs terminated. That very evening, a mass meeting was called to formulate plans to forestall what appeared to be the imminent ruin of the town. Our Board of Selectmen appointed a large citizens committee with a bank president as chair, selectmen, lots of business people and government officials, but no mill workers. They declared that local bankruptcy would occur if new business occupancy could not be found to employ the thousands of workers. When the new owners failed to find occupants, the Citizens Committee asked the owners to let the town of Ware purchase the company's land, buildings, and water power at a fair price. It would be the first public buyout of a major manufacturer in the country's history. On November 8th, 1937, hundreds of people crowded the town hall, and hundreds more stood outside. Explanation was provided in Polish and French. Citizens from all walks of life pulled together and voted for industrial survival.
The mill became Ware Industries, owned cooperatively by the people. And the police chief Bartholomew Buckley coined Ware's new slogan, "The town that can't be licked."
After World War II, social and economic progress gave rise to expectations of equal social and economic rights for African Americans. The great singer Paul Robeson, son of a runaway slave and once a resident of Enfield, expressed this to the 900 delegates at the National Labor Conference for Negro Rights in Chicago in June 1950.
As the black worker takes his place upon the stage of history, not for a bit part, but to play his full role with dignity in the very center of the action, a new day dawns in human affairs. The determination of the Negro workers, supported by the whole Negro people, and joined with the mass of progressive white working men and women, can save the labor movement. This is history's challenge to you. I know you will not fail.
The world's post-war split into a US-led West and a Soviet Union-led East reached deep into our domestic policies. Witch hunts of un-Americans equated dissent with disloyalty and infected all sectors of life, including labor. When the House Committee on Un-American Activities, HUAC, targeted Paul Robeson, he noted the irony.
It is a sad and bitter commentary on the state of civil liberties in America that the very forces of reaction who have denied me access to the lecture podium, the concert hall, the opera house, and the dramatic stage now hail me before a committee of inquisition in order to hear what I have to say.
When I was just a little thing, I used to love parades with banners, bands, and red balloons, and maybe lemonade. When I came home one May Day, my neighbor's father said, "Them marchers is all commies, tell me, kid, are you a red?" Well, I didn't know just what he meant. My hair back then was brown. Our house was all plain red brick like most others in the town. So I went and asked my mama why my neighbor called me red. My mommy took me on her knee and this is what she said. "Well, you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you marched or agitated, you're bound to hear it said. So you might as well ignore it or love the word instead. 'Cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red. You ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red."
In 1947, the reactionary post-war Congress passed the Labor Management Relations Act, also known as the Taft-Hartley Act, over President Harry Truman's veto. It outlawed the closed shop and authorized individual states to outlaw union shops and agency shops, all of them workplaces with union representation. Capitalists propagandized for these bans by calling them right-to-work laws, instead of, more accurately, open shop laws.
The entire federal government is open shop.
Labor countered that these were actually right-to-work for less laws, and indeed, wages and benefits are generally lower in open shop states, and the rate of injuries and death on the job is 30% higher.
In 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court further weakened the freedom of workers to form strong unions by imposing the open shop on public sector workers at state, county, and municipal levels.
It is no coincidence that the most racist members of Congress are also the most aggressive opponents of unions. In 1969, countering the spate of open shop laws across the country, Bayard Rustin and Cesar Chavez published a bilingual pamphlet entitled
Right-to-work laws, a trap for America's minorities.
El derecho a trabajar, una trampa para las minorías.
Bayard Rustin, a master strategist and tireless activist, is best remembered for organizing the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, one of the largest nonviolent protests ever held in the U.S. A Quaker, he brought Gandhi's protest techniques to the U.S. civil rights movement and helped mold Martin Luther King Jr. into an international symbol of peace and nonviolence. But despite those achievements, Rustin was silenced, threatened, arrested, beaten, imprisoned, and fired from important leadership positions, largely because he was an openly gay man in a fiercely homophobic era.
In 1962, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta founded the National Farm Workers Association, which became the United Farm Workers. The son of a farmer, Cesar began his social justice work as a young organizer for the Community Service Organization, a grassroots organizing effort to empower Mexican Americans in Southern California.
Right to work does not mean that every worker has a right to a job and to receive work at fair wages, reasonable hours, and under decent labor standards.
El derecho a trabajar no quiere decir que cada trabajador tenga el derecho a un empleo y de tomar trabajo con un sueldo justo, con horas razonables y bajo normas decentes de trabajo.
It does not mean that every worker has a right to secure employment with proper provisions for paid vacations and insurance safeguards against sickness and old age.
No quiere decir que cada trabajador tenga el derecho a un empleo que le asegure vacaciones con pago y le provea aseguranzas de enfermedad y vejez.
It does not mean that what it means is the opposite of all these things.
La verdad es que esta frase quiere decir todo lo contrario.
And what it does mean is the weakening of the workers' bargaining power by keeping unions out of the factory or field.
Lo que sí hace es disminuir la posición de negociar del trabajador por evitar que los sindicatos sean organizados en la fábrica y en el campo.
It does mean destroying the institution of collective bargaining and thus keeping minority workers at the bottom of the economic ladder.
Lo que sí hace es destruir la institución de una negociación colectiva y asegurar que los trabajadores que pertenecen a las minorías raciales permanezcan al nivel más bajo de la escala económica.
Cesar Chavez's union, the United Farm Workers, is a singing union. Sung from the labor rights movement, many original tunes and Mexican folk songs like De Colores are sung at union meetings.
De colores se visten los campos en la primavera. De colores son los pajaritos que vienen de afuera. De colores es el arco iris que vemos lucir. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí.
In the 50s and 60s, civil rights activists organized and demonstrated for equal rights. They were frequently beaten and jailed by the so-called forces of law and order. And it was not only in the South. On July 16, 1965, police in Springfield made an unprovoked attack on African-American patrons of the Octagon Lounge. Leaders of the city's civil rights organizations came together to appeal to the mayor and other city officials, to no avail. Numerous nonviolent demonstrations at City Hall and in Court Square that summer led to dozens of unlawful arrests.
Our demonstration on August 14th had ended, and only 44 people remained in the park. Suddenly, officers stormed in upon them, grabbing and hustling them indiscriminately. Miss Betty Belton, who has a congenital hip ailment, had been seated on a bench holding her cane. She managed to stand and tried to walk away, and two officers grabbed her under the armpits and dragged her away. Her clothes were torn and stained, and the skin ripped on her heels. When she reached the waiting paddy wagon, screaming in agony, she was flung like a bag of dirt into it. 27 men were also pushed, shoved, kicked, and thrown into this wagon built to accommodate approximately 14 persons. The garage of the city jail was filled with police officers pushing and shoving to get at the prisoners. On either side of the stairway leading to the main body of the jail were 10 to 15 officers equipped with billy clubs. People were pulled, tugged, and jerked out of the paddy wagon and struck by officers as they struggled through the gauntlet and up the steps.
Many of the demonstrators were never informed why they were arrested.
There is mean things happening in this land. There is mean things happening in this land. If you're black or brown or tan, you're in trouble with the man. There is mean things happening in this land.
From the mid-1960s through the 70s, the U.S. workers engaged in a level of sustained militancy not quite seen since the Great Depression and World War II. Tens of millions participated in one of the largest strike waves of our history. Women and people of color streamed into unions. These strikes redistributed wealth to the working class.
Not just strikes over new contract terms, but spontaneous walkouts, wildcat strikes, organized slowdown, and collective insubordination. Springfield area workers not only joined at the factories and mills and foundries, but also at retail stores, a movie house, and all 5 supermarkets, including Stop and Shop and Big Y.
Reporter's Notebook, New Unity, Springfield area labor paper. August 1971. President Nixon imposes wage and price controls. The bosses grow bolder. Labor responds with strikes, walkouts, boycotts, informational pickets, and community organizing.
1972, Typeflex and Savage Arms.
1973, Sterling Radiator, Fountain Plating, Forest Park Ambulance, the Welfare Office, and 14 more.
1974, Ramada Inn, New England Bindery, Palmer Nursing Home, Continental Trailways, Typeflex again, Bay State Gas, and 8 more.
2.7 million workers in the U.S. started 5,900 strikes in 1974. The largest number of Bureau of Labor Statistics has ever recorded.
Capital responded to the strike waves and the organizing with a determination to break labor. In August 1981, the Reagan administration fired striking air traffic controllers and replaced them with scabs. Private companies followed suit. Strike breaking and union busting became commonplace again.
In Westfield, when 68 members of Auto Workers Local 430 struck the Sterling Radiator plant, owner John Reed hired scabs. In a dramatic act of civil disobedience, 91 union and community supporters were arrested for blockading a bus delivering strikebreakers to the plant.
The Sterling Radiator strike gave us a prophetic song by Western Mass labor troubadour Tom Urovich.
Now they're trying to break my union. They're trying to bust my life. Take all that I've worked for from my kids and my wife. I was just getting where things were starting to go my way. Now these high-priced lawyers and these lousy scabs try to take my job away.
As the longest strike in Massachusetts history, nearly 3 years, Sterling Radiator became a national symbol for unions fighting for survival. With labor weakened, the Reagan administration dismantled industrial and environmental safety, taxes on the rich, aid to single mothers, food stamps, and health care for the poor.
The attack culminated during the Clinton administration with the ending of federal guarantees to families with dependent children. In 2 major steps deregulating capital, Clinton also gave us NAFTA and the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, which had reined in speculative investments by banks and protected depositors from potential losses.
Big corporations and the wealthy have rewritten the rules of the economy to stack the deck in their favor. This has prevented the benefits of productivity growth from trickling down to reach most households.
In the squares of the city, in the shadow of the steeple, by the relief office, I seen my people as they stood there hungry. I stood there asking, is this land made for you and me?
One way that labor, led by the communications workers of America, responded to the class war launched by Reaganomics was the creation of Jobs for Justice, designed to build local coalitions of labor, community, religious, and student groups to defend workers' rights. More than 11,000 attended the first Jobs with Justice rally in Miami, Florida on July 29, 1987. They rocked the Miami Convention Center with chants of "Justice! Justice! Justice!" And the great labor troubadour, Cy Khan, first performed this song.
Who owns the future? Who owns the earth? Who owns our labor? Who says what it's worth? Who owns our children? Who owns our lives? Who decides if we get jobs with justice? Justice, justice, we want jobs with justice. Justice, justice, we want jobs with justice. They want our labor, we want our rights. They make the profits, we make a fight. They take our money, we take a stand. Let me hear you raise your voice for justice. Justice, justice, we want jobs with justice. Justice, justice, we want jobs with justice.
On February 6, 1991, Cesar Chavez, president of the United Farm Workers of America, came to Springfield to open a great boycott office at Western New England College, staffed by Luis Vera. He was accompanied by his good friend and supporter, Father Brian Boland, pastor of St. Patrick's Church in South Hadley Falls.
The water is polluted with pesticides. So is the air, and so is the ground. And so are the grapes that come into the market. We're boycotting to let the consumer know that while eating grapes is not going to kill you immediately, it has cumulative effects. There is pesticide residue in the grapes, the same pesticides that are causing damage in the workers and their families. We are not boycotting to destroy those farms. We are just boycotting to get the farm owners to come to the table and deal with those issues they must deal with. This is a moral issue because it deals with human beings and because it deals with justice.
In the 21st century, capital has further escalated the class war, using the Great Recession as an excuse, an economic crisis caused by its own unregulated Wall Street speculation. It moves to slash public services and take away workers' rights, especially the basic human right to bargain collectively.
In Massachusetts, the Democratic Party picked a fight with unions by passing a bill to strip local public employees of the right to bargain over health care, a right protected by the National Labor Relations Act, but that law does not cover state, county, and municipal government employees.
Today, in the U.S., we face the greatest inequality of income, wealth, and power since the Great Depression. Capital expects to win class war easily. When a Democratic president, Barack Obama, supported corporate trade deals and cuts to Social Security, you'd think they've got it all sewn up. They certainly think so. Since the election of Donald Trump, Republican gerrymandering, and a reactionary lock on the Supreme Court.
But did anyone expect workers to go on strike at Walmart? At fast food places like McDonald's? Did we ever expect Walmart and other retailers to raise their entry rates in response to those strikes and improve scheduling and pregnancy accommodations?
There is a rising of low-wage workers. Workers with nothing to lose are demanding at least $15 an hour and gaining strength and confidence and allies as they organize. We're all saying,
low pay is not okay! Low pay is not okay! Low pay is not okay!
It seems like everyone is rising up.
Here in Massachusetts, the Raise Up Mass Coalition has won big raises in the minimum wage, which is now at $15 an hour. Also paid sick time, paid family and medical leave, and a higher income tax on the rich. Now we're fighting for $20 minimum.
And then the $6.75 minimum wage that restaurants must pay employees who also earn tips would be gradually phased out if a ballot question led by the One Fair Wage Coalition passes in this November election.
The Massachusetts Fairness for Farm Workers Coalition has a bill that would eliminate the separate Massachusetts farm workers minimum wage and allow them to have overtime pay too. The minimum for most agricultural workers is $8 per hour, significantly less than the $15 state minimum wage. Most agricultural workers also do not qualify for overtime, and if they're age 17 or younger, or in their employer's immediate family, the minimum wage doesn't even apply.
These Massachusetts campaigns are part of nationwide struggles to do away with minimum wage and overtime pay exemptions, vestiges of racial capitalism's past.
The fight back against right to work for less is increasing. In 2018 and 2019, teachers, counselors, bus drivers, custodians, and paraprofessionals went on strike in West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Arizona, all open shop states. And on February 13th of this year, Michigan repealed its open shop law, the first state to do so in nearly 60 years.
Fighting for justice, you know how much I care. Wherever I'm needed, you know I'll be there. Today the future is here in our hands. Are you with me? Will you fight for justice? Justice, justice, we want jobs with justice. Justice, justice, we want jobs with justice. Justice, justice, we want jobs with justice.
Remember last year's Striketober? The United Auto Workers stand-up strike? Strikes in schools and universities, healthcare institutions in Hollywood, in the hospitality industry and local government. The strikes of 2023 were daring and high-profile and commanded overwhelming public support.
And just last month, Chattanooga Volkswagen workers overwhelmingly voted yes to joining the United Auto Workers, despite facing interference from anti-worker politicians. More than 30 labor, faith, and community organizations, including Jobs with Justice, rallied behind them. On to Mercedes-Benz in Alabama.
UAW President Shawn Fain has called for a general strike on May 1st, 2028.
Our Western Mass sisters and brothers are rising, forming unions at Trader Joe's, Barnes & Noble, Starbucks, Smith College, Mount Holyoke College, Amherst Cinema, and Mass Mocha.
Cooperatives are a part of the rising. Here in the Valley, Willowcrest is a Black, queer, and trans-led real estate business. They are part of a cross-class, multiracial liberation movement dedicated to decommodifying housing and leveraging collective resources for affordable co-ownership of homes and commercial spaces.
Springfield-based Wellspring Cooperative Corporation is building a mutually supportive network of worker-owned cooperatives to create good jobs and wealth-building opportunities for workers. Member businesses range from an urban greenhouse to landscaping to upholstery. Wellspring is supported by the Western Mass Area Labor Federation and United Food and Commercial Workers Local 1459.
The Connecticut Valley is home to many worker-owned enterprises. One of the oldest collective copies was born of a union strike in 1982 at Noman Copies in Amherst.
The space was tiny. The air quality was terrible. The pay was lousy. The machines didn't work half the time, and management just didn't care.
The 9 Noman employees unionized with the United Electrical Workers and soon walked off the job. Business plummeted and the strike was won. But faced with eviction and a mountain of debt, Noman closed down, and the union members, backed by the community, launched Collective Copies, a worker-owned union shop incorporated on May Day, 1983.
Healthcare workers are rising. Doctors are unionizing. Union nurses are fighting union busting by so-called non-profit health systems, subsidized by public money. Personal care attendants and service employees Local 1199 are struggling against the state itself for better wages and working conditions. Healthcare unions are organizing in the community to save local hospitals. They are part of the struggle for a single-payer system of universal and comprehensive health care, also known as Medicare for All.
I'm a union nurse here in Massachusetts and a member of the Massachusetts Nurses Association at Franklin Medical Center in Greenfield. I say that if Bay State Health can afford to pay its CEO more than $700 an hour, it can afford to improve patient care and our working conditions. Building our hospital unions requires leadership from workers like me, who know the daily reality. You have to talk to people one-on-one to help them process the stress and intimidation. And you have to refuse to give in to the fear and show others that it is possible. Together, we become stronger with every challenge.
There once was a union nurse who saw things had gotten worse. She noticed lots of work shift slots left blank by the boss who held the purse. He said with half the crew, "You'll bear the work of 2. Standards fell, she had to tell that boss just what she'd do. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die. Now nurses, if you're blue, you know just what to do. There's a union crew that works for you. The NNA will see it through. A nurse's work is hard, but if you show your union card, though bosses cut staff to the bone, you will not walk alone. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die.
I work at a restaurant in the Valley. The other day, I was imagining being a customer there.
Hello! Welcome to the grand opening of the Sustainable Restaurant. I am the owner. Can I take your order?
I see on the menu that you have fair wages. Could you tell me a bit about that?
Oh, yes! Well, that's $6.75 an hour. Would you like an order of that?
That's a little too light for me. But could I at least get a side order of benefits with that?
Oh, we just ran out of benefits. We only had enough for management. But we do have lots of extra hours. And today's special is the double shift.
Does that come with overtime pay?
Overtime. I'll have to check on that. Most restaurants don't serve overtime pay. It's just too expensive.
It says here that all of these dishes are served with sexual harassment, discrimination, and health and safety violations. Could I sub that for respect and dignity in the workplace?
Sorry. We have a strict rule here. No substitutions.
It's a mighty hard road that my poor hands have hoed. My poor feet have traveled that hot, dusty road. From the edge of your city, you'll see us, and then we come with the dust and we go with the wind. New York, Massachusetts, we raise all your crops. Then it's up to New Hampshire for your apples and hops. Dig the beets from your ground, cut the grapes from your vine, to lay on your table your light sparkling wine.
I come from a small village in Mexico, just outside of Guanajuato. Life can be very hard in our village. There are no jobs, only farming, and that is hard to make a living. Now, many from our village go norte. It's a crazy process. They send you back even though they know you just want to work. And you do jobs that no one else will do. Jobs that need to be done, they're just biting the hands that feed them. I work 6 months every year on this family farm near Amherst, Massachusetts. The work is hard and constant, but the gringos, they don't want to do it. Every year we see these young kids. They last maybe a week or so, and then they say, hey, I can get more doing a lot less somewhere else. The family here respects us. They know we will work very hard. But often, people in the town, they act like I'm a mute. The fact that they cannot understand me makes me an unheard voice. One of many unheard voices. I only wish someday our voices will be heard for what they are. The voices that make this country what it is.
The voices that make this country what it is.
The voices that make this country what it is.
The voices that make this country what it is.
The voices that make this country what it is.
When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what voice on earth